Welcome to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive with Dr. Rebecca Risk. Do you ever feel that even though nothing seems seriously wrong and you pass all the medical tests, that you still feel that your health, pain, and fatigue are completely out of control? It doesn't have to be that way. Listen to the tips and suggestions given on our program today and take back control of your health. Now, here is Dr. Rebecca Risk.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Falling Through the Cracks. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. William Lee. He is president of a global charity called the Angiogenesis Foundation. Dr. Lee's work has impacted more than 50 million people worldwide, and he is a world-renowned physician, scientist, and author of the best-selling book, Eat to Beat Disease, The New Science of How Your Body Can Heal Itself. Dr. Lee, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. It's a pleasure to be on.
So what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I'm a physician, internal medicine, and I'm also a research scientist. I'm known as a vascular biologist, so I study blood vessels, vascular. And, for years, I actually have been doing what I was trained to do, which is to diagnose disease, write prescriptions, use drugs to actually treat terrible problems. And I started to realize when my patients were asking me, almost without fail, hey, doc, what could I do for myself as they were walking out the door? And I would say, what do you mean? And they would say, what can I be doing for myself? Like, what should I eat? I realized this was something that I was never taught in medical school or any kind of training afterwards. And I realized that that was just really wrong. And so I set on this journey to really use my background in the science of medicine to try to figure out what is the evidence and what foods actually can help us prevent, help treat, and even reverse diseases. And so that's led me on this journey to put together and do research on more than 200 different foods that actually help the body boost its own health defense systems. And that's what my book, Eat to Beat Disease, is all about, how your body can heal itself from the inside out and how our foods can actually make this better.
Well, I love what you said there. It's very common that I have a patient come in my office and their doctor told them that food doesn't matter. And, it might have been even a GI specialist, like something really obvious that what you're eating is going to impact, your health. And to me, I have to sit there and explain, well, it's actually because they don't know and they haven't taken the time to know, and doctors aren't taught, and that's why you're in my office, because I'm going to help you with that part. And then it's very confusing and overwhelming, because if you take to the internet, there's different diets and they conflict themselves and people disagree, and it's a confusing road to go down, and people just want some direction. They want some help of how to feel better without a lot of medication.
Right. Well, and the feeling better part is really super important, because all of us are born, the moment we sort of arrive from our mom's wombs, our bodies are already equipped with the defenses that keep us from getting sick. And these health defenses actually are firing on all cylinders from the time we're born all the way into our last breath. And that's what makes us feel good. That's what makes us feel like we are all we can be. And those same health defenses are what our lifestyle and sometimes our genetics can actually wear down or take down over time, including as we age. And so the new way of actually thinking about how to keep us, all we can be, not just fit, but really well, feeling good and not just being good. I think it has to do with this understanding when it comes to food and health. It's not just about the food. It's as much about how our bodies respond to what we put inside it. Well,
my idea of a healthy person is somebody who there's more than just this factor of whether or not you have a diagnosis of a disease. It's whether or not you are emotionally, mentally well, whether or not you can function in your daily life, because a lot of people don't have a diagnosis, but they're still unwell and can't function. And those, and there's more to this as well, but those things get ignored by the regular system. It's like, well, you don't have a diagnosis, your blood work is normal, I know you're not functioning, but you need to go home and we're not going to look at anything else.
Well, that's right. I mean, look, I helped over my career to develop new biotech treatments for diseases like cancer and vision loss and complications of diabetes. So I do recognize how important, the standard medical system is. But this is the system that actually relies on the practice of things as they always have been. And while new things happen in modern medicine, there's a lot of entrenched thinking. And when there are situations with patients that don't lend themselves to a quick solution, I think that this is where patients feel lost. And the new science of health and wellness tells us that, we barely scratch the surface in understanding the body. We barely understand our immune system. We barely understand our gut health because of the discoveries of the microbiome. We barely understand even how our circulation works in the Western sense of circulation of blood, vessels bringing blood flow, because we've only recently appreciated that we've got 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels packed inside our bodies. And what those blood vessels do is much more than bring oxygen and nutrients. They're actually communicating one part of the body with another part of the body as well. So I think the humility of understanding, of recognizing what we do know, and then also still acknowledging how much we don't know, opens the mind to lots of different types of ideas that can all, at the end of the day, help our patients.
Well, and I agree with you. And in your first section of your book, you talk about a lot of things which are actually new. And one of them is the angiogenesis, which you are the president of that foundation. Can you explain to us what that is?
Sure. Angiogenesis is a fancy Greek word that really describes how our body grows blood vessels. Angio is blood, genesis is how they grow. And, as our bodies develop, after our mom and dad conceives us, we start to develop, actually one of the first organs that ever develops in our body is our circulation. So 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels ultimately develop, and so that when we're an adult, packed inside our bodies is this enormous sort of set of highways and byways, and they do bring oxygen and nutrients. Whatever we eat gets into our bloodstream and then actually gets carried to nourish our cells. And we have to have just the right number of blood vessels. If you don't have enough, so this is seen in heart disease or sometimes in diabetes, where your nerves die back or your wounds don't heal or you have heart disease, you run into a problem. You need we need our vessels to nourish our cells and our organs to keep us alive. And so one of the real interesting areas is how do we actually grow blood vessels to actually support enough blood flow, on one hand. On the other hand, when you have too many blood vessels, excessive angiogenesis, that can actually, those extra blood vessels actually can feed diseases. So, for example, like cancers, we all form cancers in our body all the time because we've got trillions of cells that are dividing, and they make a few mistakes, and they turn into these microscopic cancers. But those cancers are harmless because they can't grow bigger than the head of a ballpoint pen without a blood supply. And then our immune system just spots them and wipes them out. But if they actually are able to hijack our blood vessel system, if they're able to create tumor angiogenesis, the moment a blood vessel touches a tiny tumor, it can start growing 16,000 times in only 2 weeks. And those same blood vessels that feed the cancer can allow cancers to escape back into our circulation and spread. And we call that metastases. And so Too few blood vessels, not good. Too many blood vessels might be even worse. And so one of the body's health defense systems, the angiogenesis defense system, nourishes our body with oxygen and nutrients, but just at the right amount. And that's a theme, which is balance in our body is critical for health.
And you talk about stem cells as well. What are those?
Okay, well, stem cells are the baby cells that actually are the starter cells that our bodies develop from. And when we start developing in our mom's womb, that's all we are stem cells. And these cells are amazing because they can turn into anything. They can turn into a leg, an arm, a brain, a heart. And after we're born and as we grow up, we obviously lose most of these stem cells because our organs do develop. Our bodies develop into the people that we are and the structures that they are. But there are a small number of these stem cells that still stick around as we're adults. And these stem cells can be in our bone marrow. They can actually be in our skin. And they can sometimes be in in our fat and other organs as well. When we get into trouble as adults and we need to actually repair ourselves from the inside out, if there's injury, like basically our body sends out in a distress signal, and stem cells will come out of our bone marrow. They kind of like fly out like bees come out of a hive, and they actually get to the injured area, like a wound, and they start healing and regenerating that tissue from the inside out. So, like when we were in grade school, we were taught by our teachers that starfish and salamanders can regenerate. So they can grow a new arm or a new leg or tail, but people can't. And for decades, that was thought to be the rule of biology. But now we realize that, in fact, humans do regenerate. We've got these stem cells, and they actually help us heal from the inside out. And what's amazing is that foods can actually help prompt those stem cells to accelerate their healing.
That's interesting because everybody talks about stem cell therapy is becoming an emerging therapy, how to treat injuries, and some people are talking about MS, and you're saying that we can stimulate the stem cells with food so that we can stimulate our own healing in this way.
That's right. And in fact, there have been some really amazing research studies showing that, for example, we know stem cells are important because, for example, there was a study in Italy that was done showing that people who suffer burns from accidents, when they go to the emergency room, if you measure their stem cells, they are in their bloodstream, they're up through the roof. And over time, as their body's healing, you see the stem cells, more and more and more stem cells come out until the patient rounds the corner, the body's healing up, and then the body's stem cells kind of shut back down to normal baseline levels. And in fact, another study showed that people who had heart disease, if you measured stem cells in their blood before they had a heart procedure and then followed them for a year, the people who had the highest levels of stem cells at the very beginning actually had the least chance of dying of a heart attack or stroke compared to the people who had only low levels. And so that tells you how many stem cells we have, how high they are, and what they do actually can make a huge difference between sort of like how living or dying. And what I found particularly interesting, and I write about in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, is that foods can do this. You can go to get stem cell therapies, but it's even more remarkable. There was a research study done in San Francisco where they studied people in their 60s who had heart disease, and the only thing they gave them is 2 cups of hot chocolate every day for 30 days. A hot chocolate being made with dark cacao, which is dark chocolate or high flavanols. That's one of the natural chemicals found in cacao, dark chocolate. And they found that if these people who already had heart disease were drinking 2 cups, that's all, 2 8-ounce cups of hot chocolate a day for a month, that's the only thing that was done, the number of stem cells in their bloodstream would actually double compared to the beginning.
Well,
really quite amazing that foods could do that.
Yeah, and it makes it sound very, very easy. And I'm sure that you might have a comment on the sugar that's in the hot chocolate, but there's a lot of things you can do about that. But that's not a lot of cocoa. And to be able to get that to stimulate your healing that dramatically is amazing.
Right. And don't forget, the whole issue about sugar is an added substance to things like chocolate. Chocolate itself is not sweet. And so, these are choices that we can make, and what kind of sugar you add for sweetener. I think what I try to do with my approach to diet and health is really try to focus on what are the good things that science is discovering we should add to our diets as a way of balancing the things that, that might not be so good for us, that some of us are going to be ingesting and consuming anyway. We should cut down on some of the bad things. We spend most of our time thinking about the good things. There'll be less room in our minds and in our bodies for the bad things that we eat.
Well, we're going to take a quick break. We'll pick this up when we get back. We're talking today with Dr. William Li, and we're discussing his book, Eat to Beat Disease. We'll be back shortly.
Sometimes it just seems that nobody understands. There's one individual who can help. If you're living with somebody who faces challenges such as autism, Asperger's, or other exceptional needs, you'll want to tune into Solutions and Strategies with Dr. Sean, Living the Challenge. Together, we'll uncover a variety of solutions to the challenges faced by individuals, their families, and teachers. Listen live every Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern, on Voice America Health and Wellness.
Do you feel that you aren't at your best when it comes to your personal health? Even if your doctor gives you a clean bill of health and says everything is in working order, perhaps you aren't feeling at the top of your game. Dr. Rebecca Risk overcame pain and fatigue despite all tests to the contrary. Learn how she put her health back on track and how you can too on Falling Through the Cracks, live every Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time, 12 noon Eastern Time on Voice America Health and Wellness.
When a woman is diagnosed with breast cancer, it's probably the most frightening thing that's ever happened to her. Friends and family often don't know what to do for support, not to mention the patient herself. That's where Breast Friends Cancer Support Radio comes in. Join Becky Olson, breast cancer survivor and advocate. She helps by providing inspiration, information, and most of all, hope. Tune in every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time, 12 noon Eastern Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel.
You are listening to Falling Through the Cracks with your host, Dr. Rebecca Risk. To reach the program today, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email directly to Dr. Risk. The email address is anantacalgary@gmail.com. Now, back to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive.
A stain-free clean home is something to be proud about, but it's hard to maintain when you're using cleaning products that don't work well or take forever to use. Q Carbona, a household brand that has turned their decades of cleaning experience into products that get the job done fully, quickly, and easily. When I first heard about Stain Devils, my stain removing game was changed. Think about this. If you have a chocolate stain, it doesn't make sense to treat it with a formula that removes wine because they are chemically different. Knowing this, Carbona created specific stain removers for specific stain types. Genius, right? Beyond stain removers, they have highly efficient products for your laundry, carpets, and washing machine. My co-host Oliver, who is a Chihuahua Cross, wants to remind you not to forget about the pet stain and odor remover. Want to start living your life unstained? Shop Carbona.com with code FTTC for 20% off your order. Happy cleaning. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today I'm talking with Dr. William Li, and he is the author of Eat to Beat Disease. Now, Dr. Li, you talk in your book about DNA damage, which is starting to be talked about more. I know, well, maybe you can just explain how much we understand about this and what it means.
Yeah, well, sure. So here's the thing about DNA. Like, we all have heard about DNA. Some of it actually we think about, like, from Ancestry.com or, some of these genetic analyses that you can swab your cheek and send it out to see who we're related to. And people know that DNA is kind of like the code of life, and it is. It tells our body how to make the proteins that keep us alive. But a lot of people don't realize that our DNA is also one of our body's health defense systems. It keeps us from getting more sick, and the way it does this is by protecting our genetic code, are these instructions from being harmed from the environment. So what do we mean by harm from the environment? Well, it turns out that DNA is often damaged by the environment. Pollution, toxins in the environment, even ultraviolet radiation can damage DNA. We know that, for example, solvent in fumes can be very destructive DNA. So I ask people, like, when you fill your car up with gas, when you're at the filling station, do you stand upwind or downwind of the at the tank? And most people stop and they're going, I never even thought about that. Well, here's what I say. If you smell the gas going into your tank, you are standing downwind, and your lungs are taking in the petroleum, the gasoline, and that's causing DNA damage. So how come we don't develop lung cancer the next day? It's partly because our DNA can fix itself. Same thing as the sun. Besides, not being in a tanning salon or in a tanning booth or on the beach, getting sunburned, which can cause melanoma and damage your DNA. How come just going out and sitting in traffic and having the sun shining through your window doesn't actually cause cancer? Because our DNA can fix itself. So in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, I talk about sort of the ways that DNA is hardwired to be able to neutralize the incoming missiles that are trying to damage it. So these are antioxidants, or it can actually repair itself faster if there's already damage. So that's like paving the pothole in a road so your car doesn't get damaged when you drive over it. And then the other thing is that there are these protective caps called telomeres that are protecting our DNA at their very ends. They're like the kind of the plastic caps on the tip of a shoelace that prevent the shoelace from unraveling and being damaged. So the shoelace is DNA, the telomere is the plastic cap protecting it. And these are just some of the ways that our DNA is hardwired to protect us against the environment as we age, and elements that can actually be boosted by the foods that we eat.
Well, that's pretty amazing, because I think that a lot of people look at genetics like this is the blueprint for my life, and this is, my dad had heart disease and I'm going to get heart disease, etc. And what you're saying is the opposite. We can repair the damage. And I explain to people when they get anxious about the genetics like that we also know that heart disease can be prevented. So whatever gene you're looking at that you're worried about, we can also just have a look and say this is something that can be prevented. Is that how you talk about it as well?
Absolutely. I mean, look, it is true that, DNA are the instructions, the blueprint that we inherit from our moms and dads. And that blueprint's not going to change. But what our bodies do with that blueprint can be massively affected by our lifestyles. And so the things we know are some of the harmful behaviors that can really be damaging. So harmful lifestyles, you smoke, you're going to damage your DNA. You drink a lot of alcohol, you're going to damage your DNA. If you don't sleep well enough, you're going to damage your DNA. Live in stress, damage your DNA. Work in an environment where you're filled with toxins, surrounding you, going to damage your DNA. But that's kind of like the glass half full approach to life. And what I like to do is to give people this idea that, look, we can fill up our cup by doing things that help our body's DNA defense mechanisms work even better. And the simplest things like our diet can actually make a big difference by protecting our DNA.
In the beginning of the show, you talked about the microbiome, which is something that's being talked about more and more over the years as we're coming to understand it more. And I'm not sure we understand the full everything, but can you just explain what that is?
Right. Well, we used to think of ourselves, just as human, right? But we're now realizing that inside our bodies are 39 trillion bacteria that represent our other selves, our bacterial self. And most of these bacteria, they do live on the skin and in any crevice in our body, but most of them are actually in our gut. And these good bacteria are changing our views of what bacteria is altogether. If you remember, going back into the 1800s and 1900s, when researchers scientists first discovered bacteria, it was mostly in the context of infections that could kill you. And so the miracle of antibiotics to kill those bad bacteria led to this mindset that, we should always kill bacteria. Bacteria are bad. We should wash our hands. We should get rid of all these bad bacteria. And any kind of bacteria is a bad bacteria. We now know that there's a lot of good bacteria, and if you have if you have more good bacteria than bad bacteria, it's like a neighborhood. If most of the people living in the neighborhood are good, law-abiding citizens, your neighborhood is going to be happy. And if you have a lot of bad actors, bad bacteria growing, the neighborhood is going to be kind of dicey. And that's actually what happens in our gut. So a lot of the stuff that we're seeing, kind of irritable bowel, inflammatory bowel disease, and frankly, even things like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autism, we're starting to track back for the first time to look at what's actually happening in our gut. And the startling thing, Rebecca, is that we're beginning to connect bad bacteria in our gut to many of the conditions that our patients had no idea what was going on, and their doctors were scratching their heads saying, well, your blood tests are fine, but maybe your bacteria is not so good. And that's really one of the exciting ways of thinking about our health, is to ask ourselves, are we doing good things for our gut bacteria? Are we feeding the right things? Or are we actually eating things that are harmful for our gut bacteria that we should cut out?
Well, and, I love that you're talking about this. When somebody comes into my office, the first thing I do, no matter what their complaint is look at their gut health and then treat them accordingly. And we start there. And oftentimes, more than not, they come back and most of their symptoms are gone, and there's little else left to do, even if their gut wasn't their main complaint. And, I point out to people that this is how you're absorbing your nutrients. This is how you're eating. This is your good and bad bacteria in your body getting back into balance, and your immune system as well, so that you can fight off whatever else you're trying to deal with. But no matter how many shows and conversations that we have, I still feel like we need to hit people on the head with this, how important that your gut is to your overall health.
Right. Well, that's true. And what's interesting is, the old adage that, your hip bone's going to your leg bone. Well, it turns out our gut bacteria is connected to our immune system. And, for example, when I was in medical school, I was just taught that, our immune system is mostly in our lymph nodes and our spleen and a few other organs. But it turns out that there is a whole new discovered part of our immune system that is like a jelly roll inside our intestines. And our gut bacteria, which lives inside the cavity of our intestines, communicates directly with that intestinal immune system. When our gut bacteria is happy, they train our immune system to do its job, to be able to not only help us resist infection, less colds, less flu, but it also even helps our immune system conduct surveillance. They're kind of like the watchers, the police patrol to look for cancer in our body. And when we're now beginning to revise our thinking to understand that if our gut bacteria is not healthy or happy, it might actually even put us at higher risk for diseases like cancer or other bad infections, because our immune system is not doing the job that it should be doing. So yeah, we got to take care of our gut bacteria. Eating prebiotics, which is fibers and other food elements that we might not absorb as humans, but we're feeding our gut. So we used to think, by the way, that if you ate a lot of fiber, that's good. Fiber is good for you because it stimulates your intestines to keep moving, so you'll have good bowel movements. You'll be regular, as we used to call it. But it turns out that while that may be true, an even more important part is that the fiber that we don't absorb, that our gut bacteria loves to eat. So we're feeding our aquarium, our own pet bacteria inside our gut with prebiotics like fiber. And when they're happy and they're well fed, they can actually stimulate our immune system. If prebiotics are good, you can have probiotics, which are the bacteria themselves, especially from fermented foods. And then, there's a whole bunch of foods to actually try to stay away from, like processed meats and red meats and high-fat foods, because they actually tend to stress out our healthy gut bacteria.
So with high-fat foods, do you just mean like deep-fried foods, or are you, because a lot of people now are doing paleo or keto diets where they are eating more high-fat?
Yeah. Well, listen, here's the whole story on fat, right? There's good fats and bad fats. Or maybe there's better fats and there's worse fats is probably the best way to think about it. We know the good fats, because I like to talk about the good stuff first. Our polyunsaturated or PUFAs or omega-3 fatty acids you get from your salmon or your oily fish. We know that that's good for your heart. That's good for our blood vessels to help prevent bad blood vessels forming. Those also feed our microbiome. They help to protect our DNA, and they help our immunity. So the better fats are really good to have from their natural sources. The bad fats are the ones that we tend to find, saturated fats. They are the ones that we find in red meat, very common in processed meats. They're also found in a lot of dairy products, like ultra-fatty foods like that. So what we do know, and this is maybe the kind of like the reveal of the science behind, you should eat better healthy fat oils and healthy fats and stay away from the bad fats, is that now we can add to all the litany of reasons that the better fats help our gut bacteria, whereas the worse fats, the saturated fats found in meat, for example, tend to damage or stress out our gut bacteria.
Which, we're down these roads of being very confused right now. I think one thing we do is too much extreme in one direction, and then we kind of go into an imbalance in that direction. So we have to correct it. It kind of seems as a society what we do to me. It's a theory, but people are confused, and a lot of people still want to continue eating red meat, and it's part of their lifestyle or their desire. Is there a safe amount of red meat, or does that just always cause too much stress on the body?
Well, look, here's the whole thing. I totally on the same page with you. It's about balance. It's about moderation. It's about making more good choices than bad choices. I used to always tell my patients one thing. Life is for the living, and so we should really enjoy what we do. And my book, Eat to Beat Disease, is really all about empowering people to really lean into the things that they really love, so long as they're healthy. So that's why I list 200 foods that are out there that are healthy. Pick the ones that you love and start with those as healthy eating, and you're going to love it already, and so you're already ahead of the game. When it comes to meat, look, many people choose. We know, for example, that plant-based foods are a healthier dietary pattern. So Mediterranean, Asian, all the healthy dietary patterns are mostly plant-based. Why? Because in ancient cultures, there wasn't a lot of money. Plants were abundant, locally grown. And our bodies are really well adjusted to eating plants. The plants also have a lot of fiber, which feeds our gut bacteria, again, helping us to be healthy, as well as having bioactive natural chemicals that activate our body's health defenses. But what about red meat? Can we take red meat? Well, I would say I would throw this into the same hopper. Can we have added sugar? Is it okay to have sugar every now and then? What about some red meat? Is it okay to cheat and eat some processed foods every now and then, or even dairy? I would say, look, we should spend most of our time eating good things. If we really want to, every now and then, we're all human. We all are in different circumstances on a daily basis. If you can eat a little bit of meat, that's probably all right, as long as you're, kind of thinking about how to actually compensate by eating some plants. And what I do in my book is I talk about this plan called 5 by 5 by 5. It's not a dietary plan. It's really a framework. Got 5 health defense systems, blood vessels, angiogenesis, stem cells we talked about, microbiome, DNA, and our immune system, which everybody knows about. If you actually if you eat to feed those health defense systems, your body knows how to actually resist and prevent, and in some cases reverse disease. So you're in good shape, and you eat a little bit of meat, that's probably fine. I don't like to say you can eat up to this much meat because everybody's going to be different. But what I will say is that processed meats, the kinds of things that, like the sausages and salamis and all this other kind of stuff that you would find in the grocery store under processed meats, there's probably no safe amount to eat of those because the World Health Organization has classified processed meats as a carcinogen linked to higher risk of developing cancer, especially the bowel, which makes sense. So, look, we do a lot of things that actually increase our risk of cancer. We go to the beach, right? That increases your risk of cancer. But that doesn't mean that if you have that information, why would you want to harm yourself knowingly if by doing something? So this is why having the information arms you to be able to make the best choices for you at that time.
Well, perfect. We're going to talk about what those foods are when we get back from this break. We're talking today with Dr. William Li, and we're discussing his book, Eat to Beat Disease, and we'll be back shortly.
Sometimes it just seems that nobody understands. There's one individual who can help. If you're living with somebody who faces challenges such as autism, Asperger's, or other exceptional needs, you'll want to tune into Solutions and Strategies with Dr. Sean, Living the Challenge. Together, we'll uncover a variety of solutions to the challenges faced by individuals, their families, and teachers. Listen live every Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern, on Voice America Health and Wellness.
Do you feel that you aren't at your best when it comes to your personal health? Even if your doctor gives you a clean bill of health and says everything is in working order, perhaps you aren't feeling at the top of your game. Dr. Rebecca Risk overcame pain and fatigue despite all tests to the contrary. Learn how she put her health back on track and how you can too on Falling Through the Cracks, live every Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time, 12 noon Eastern Time on Voice America Health and Wellness.
When a woman is diagnosed with breast cancer, it's probably the most frightening thing that's ever happened to her. Friends and family often don't know what to do for support, not to mention the patient herself. That's where Breast Friends Cancer Support Radio comes in. Join Becky Olson, breast cancer survivor and advocate. She helps by providing inspiration, information, and most of all, hope. Tune in every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time, 12 noon Eastern Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel.
You are listening to Falling Through the Cracks with your host, Dr. Rebecca Risk. To reach the program today, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email directly to Dr. Risk. The email address is anantacalgary@gmail.com. Now, back to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Falling Through the Cracks. Today, I'm talking with Dr. William Li, and we're discussing his book, Eat to Beat Disease. So, Dr. Li, one of the main things in your book is, these are all the things that our bodies that need to be well as can obviously go wrong, your microbiome, all this kind of stuff. But what are some of your favorite foods that help repair a lot of these that you do on a regular basis?
Yeah, so listen, I love food. I'm a foodie, and I like to cook as well. So I'm somebody that really has an appreciation of food for its taste. I like the culture behind food. I've lived in the Mediterranean. I've spent time cooking meals from different cultures, and so I'm somebody who I think likes to. I live to eat as well as eat to live. So there's so many foods that are actually good for you. Some of my favorites, I'll tell you, I love tomatoes. Tomatoes are a fruit. I know there's a lot of mythology out there that tomatoes are related to the nightshade family, and there's lectins and they're poison. I can tell you that all the data that's out there, the research, the hard research, shows that tomatoes are actually quite safe to eat. And by the way, they're amazingly delicious. Now, what tomatoes have, and the reason I like them, besides their taste, is that tomatoes have a natural chemical called lycopene, which Mother Nature kind of baked into or kind of put into the tomato. And when you pick a tomato from a vine, the lycopene is in a form that your body only partially absorbs, so most of it gets passed through. But if you actually heat the tomato, like simmer it, cook it, and if you just, especially because lycopene is what we call fat soluble, so it likes to dissolve in oil, and you use a little olive oil, tomatoes and olive oil, think Mediterranean diet. Research studies have shown that people who, this is specifically men, this is a study of 36,000 men, that if those who eat 2 to 3 servings of cooked tomatoes per week, this is tomato sauce, and the amount is only about a half a cup 2 to 3 times a week, very easy to do, that people who eat that cooked tomatoes at that pattern have an up to 30% reduction in the risk of developing prostate cancer. So, I'm a man. I'm always thinking about how to actually lower the risk for myself. But I also love tomatoes. So tomatoes is one of my favorite foods. Another favorite is mangoes. I love mangoes. Just something that I have always loved since I was a kid. They're juicy. They're amazingly naturally sweet, and they've got a little bit of tanginess. But here's the other thing. I call a mango kind of like a home run. It actually hits all 5 of our health defense systems. It helps our blood vessels become right-sized. It prevents, too many bad blood vessels from growing. It stimulates and supports our stem cells. There's natural chemicals in mangoes that do that. The fiber in mango, anybody who's eaten a mango will know that it's like got a little stringy inside that feeds our gut microbiome. It makes our gut health happier. They're packed with antioxidants, protect our DNA, and mangoes have been shown to actually boost our immune system as well. So that's another one of my favorites. Tomatoes and mangoes, and I've got a whole bunch of other foods that I also love. I love mushrooms. Mushrooms, white button mushrooms, shiitake mushrooms, chanterelle. I mean, you name them. If they're edible in the woods and they're on the soil and you can pick them and cook them, I love them. And it turns out that mushrooms are an amazing source of dietary fiber, which feeds our gut microbiome, boosts the immune system, and also a natural chemical called beta-glucan, which actually helps our blood vessels stay healthier as well. So, these are just some examples, like I would say, among my top 3 that I love to eat.
So I love that when you talked about the tomatoes, all the reasons that people are avoiding them, but then they're good for us. And, I have people come into my office and say, well, I don't do this and this and this and this. And I sit there and I point out that I could probably find something wrong with every food that they eat. And we can't go down those roads because then we have nothing left. And it is about a balance, maybe picking, if something doesn't work for you. If you don't tolerate dairy, don't eat dairy, but find out what part of dairy you don't tolerate, that kind of thing, so that we're not completely limited. Do you think that there is an issue when people are too restrictive and damage, say to their microbiome just because they're not eating a variety because they're afraid? Yeah,
well, listen, I mean, all the research shows, if you look at the blue zones, these are 5 places in the world where people regularly live to healthy, ripe old ages, including over the 100 years old. They eat, one of the hallmarks is diversity of their diet. They eat a lot of plant-based foods. They eat a lot of fresh foods. They eat very little processed foods, and they have diverse diets. Diverse diets are what our body and our bacteria and our health defense systems are used to. It's so easy to think about. I think we tend to oversimplify. Well, if tomatoes are good, well, then I'll have a ton of tomatoes, and that's all I'll eat. It doesn't work that way. Our bodies are designed and need lots of different types of goodness. And that's why our taste buds also, by the way, are developed for, sweet, salty, sour. Our entire system is hardwired to be able to take in and benefit from a diversity of foods, and even plant-based foods. I mean, think about it. You don't want to only eat kale, What about some radicchio every now and then? And what about some carrots every now and then? And so I think I encourage people to, really consider what they love to eat. And, I meet people all the time that say, Doc, I got a terrible diet. Like, all I eat is junk food. And what I would say is that, is that really true? Let's take a look, and I'll show them a list of 200 foods in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, and I'll say, is that really true? Like, let's take a look. Let's walk together through this and see if there's stuff that you love. And then inevitably they'll say, you know what? I like this. I actually like this. Yeah, my mom used to make that. And what I do is I try to get them to identify the stuff they love that's from a healthy list, and then encourage them. It's a positive thing. Like, food should be about pleasure and enjoyment and empowerment. Don't want to eat too much, and you want to choose the right things. But what I think is not that healthy, Rebecca, is like when there's a message sent that food is associated with guilt, shame, and fear. And so my message is, look, there's plenty of people that actually kind of try to convince you what not to do. I'm trying to actually help people appreciate what they should do and what they can do.
Well, and that's really important, I mean, a lot of people do need to change how they're eating, and, they probably are eating too much sugar, and, it's something I see a lot, and I do a challenge. I have people just go home and read some of the labels if you're having packaged food, and they come back and they're in shock that they were eating as much as they were because they had no idea. They just weren't informed, and they weren't reading labels, and they thought it was different. And so I just want to open people's eyes that, you need to be aware of what you're doing, but I don't go down a road of really strict diets with people. I know some people feel like I do, but when you look at all the other diets out there, I'm like, you need variety. You need to not to focus on just one food, whether it's cutting that out or putting it in, because people go overboard with putting something in. They'll juice something, and then that will cause problems. And I tell people you really need to have variety, and you need to love what you're doing. So go and explore this and find things that you love, find a recipe that you love, and see if you could change it a little bit or make it even better.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what I think is variety is, the spice of life. We really should lean into our food. And by the way, here's another interesting thing, right? Like, everyone's different. We know that. We know that for a fact, but we're also influenced by what our parents did and where they came from and where our grandparents came from, because it turns out that, the diet of our ancestors, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, whatever they ate, actually, and going even back further, alters and changes the way that our genetics are. Our DNA doesn't change, but the way that our DNA is affected will be changed. And that's part of the reasons why we all have different tastes and taste buds. I'm not talking about food allergies. I'm talking about our preferences and why, some people prefer one dish or another dish. The other thing I want to sort of emphasize is that, we tend, I tell this to people all the time, please try not to oversimplify. Life isn't simple. Life is complex, wonderfully complex, and there's nothing more complex than food. We tend not to eat individual ingredients. We eat foods that are mixed and cooked together. I mean, think about a vegetable stew or a minestrone soup. I mean, look at all the stuff that's thrown in there. It's good for you. And part of that complexity is what our body craves. So rather than try to oversimplify, be too strict, I think what we should do is open our minds to embracing more variety of the healthy foods in ways that suit our tastes. And then the final thing I think about, sort of like my general principle, is don't eat too much, because it turns out that the other thing that is remarkably consistent about research is we're finding that if you tend to eat less, if you restrict your calories and eat less, whether this is in a research lab or in communities, people eating less actually helps our body's health defenses, helps us live longer. And while, I'm not talking about keto, and I'm not even really talking about caloric restriction or intermittent fasting, but yeah, you know what, if you skip breakfast every now and then, some people say skipping breakfast is terrible. I think that's probably coming from the cereal industry, old school 1960s marketing. You know what? Every now and then, if you're busy and your life doesn't accommodate it, you skip breakfast or lunch, which I do, think about that as something that's actually probably helping your health defenses, as long as you're not doing it to an extreme. And that's the whole, back to your point about balance.
Well, I agree. I get asked about fasting all the time, and I do fast. I've done a few shows. And it opened up my eyes. I was actually for years very resistant to fasting until I understood the studies on it. And I looked at it and said, this is actually important, but I don't do, 3-5 day fasts. I do, intermittent fasting. I actually I don't snack during the day. And I explain to people that's actually fasting. If I have 4 or 5 hours between my meals and I don't snack, I'm fasting. I'm not eating. I'm not getting my blood sugar up. So it doesn't have to be very dramatic either. It can just be, as you said, skipping a meal just one day, even eating, dinner at the end of the day or lunch and dinner. And it doesn't have to be where you feel like you're torturing yourself and starving yourself, because we also need the nutrients that comes from food. And I think we can go the other way with fasting, where we're a little distracted with, I'm not going to eat because then I can get my immune system up or whatever. And we tend to go very dramatic, I think, as a society.
Right. Right. Well, and I think this is where, if we start with who we are as individuals and take a moment to catch our breath and think about what it is that we actually prefer to do. Don't just rush out and do stuff because someone told you to do it, or you heard about it on television, or you're seeing it online. Take a quiet moment to think about what it is that what brings you pleasure, what's important to you. And I think that if you earlier on you mentioned about the sort of mental health and physical health, it's all tied together. And taking a moment to be calm, to think about our health, it not only is good for our brains and good for our hearts, it also helps to guide us in better decision-making overall. And I think starting with who we are is the most important thing.
I agree. Now, your book is very informative and actually easy to read. We've only touched on a little bit of what's in it. It's actually got a lot of more information in it. So if anybody wants more of this information, how can they find your book?
Right. Well, listen, I love having people come to my website. It's www.drwilliamlee, Dr. William Lee is spelled Li.com, drwilliamlee.com. Or you can follow me on social. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. It's at Dr. William Lee, Li, at Dr. William Lee. One of the things that I actually really am super excited by the response to is, the 200 foods that I talk about in my book, I actually arranged them into a practical grocery shopping list that's organized like you would find the foods when you push a cart into a grocery store. So I went to a bunch of grocery stores and literally with my list of foods kind of checked off and reordered them on the basis of how I tend to encounter them. And so anybody who comes to my website, signs up, it's free, gets to download a free shopping list of my foods according to how they would find them in a grocery store. And that, to me, is just sort of like a little cheat sheet to help you get to it. And by the way, you can also find my book, Eat to Beat Disease, The New Science of How Your Body Can Heal Itself, anywhere where books are sold, whether it's your local bookstore, whether it's Amazon or another online bookseller.
Well, perfect. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. It was a great show.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much.
And if anybody wants more information on my story or what I went through to get back to health, my story's on my website at dr-risk.com. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. And thank you so much for listening today. Be sure to make today a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive. Please join Dr. Rebecca Risk again next Monday at noon Eastern Time and 9 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. We'll talk more next week.